going on, everybody? How's everybody doing? It's always funny to hear your own bio because you never really think you've done that much, and then somebody reads a bio out loud, and it makes you feel like you've done a lot more than you actually have. I love being considered a professional black person. That's something I always put into my bio because that means I get to write about Hennessy and wings and things of that nature, and people actually pay me for it. So that's always fascinating. And I do want to point out that I always make sure to add Morehouse College, which is my alma mater, to the list of all the places I've spoken at, even though people probably put a lot more emphasis on places like Harvard and Yale. But if you know, you know, in the parlance of current hip hop culture. So, Morehouse College, my HBCUs will always be number one in our hearts and minds. So thank you all for having me here. Thank you, Montgomery College, for bringing me here to talk about healing, reframing the narrative. Before we get started, and this is actually a really good way to break into this, y'all gonna have to forgive me, I have notes on my phone, so that's why I'm gonna be walking around holding my phone the whole time. I am neither a therapist or a practitioner in the field of mental health. What I am is a pop culture documentarian of sorts. I provide commentary on culture, I provide commentary on the world as it is, especially as it pertains to the Black community. I provide an insight and look, and hopefully the kind of thing that we can look back on historically and see where we were at a certain time. And it's in that framing, in that manner, where I think my presence here adds value. Because see, one of the ways that our culture has evolved in even the past 10 years is our discussions about mental health, healing, and how we view self-care, and how we look at people who are taking it upon themselves to view self-care and ensure that they are taking care of themselves first. There was a time when Naomi Osaka deciding that she was going to leave the French Open because she was dealing with bouts of depression would be viewed as a lack of mental toughness. I don't think we view it that way anymore. I think most of us were sympathetic to the issues that Naomi Osaka was having to deal with. And that's a much needed change. That's a substantial departure. And that's the kind of space that I think we all need to be in when we're talking about healing, when we're talking about creating a space to reframe the way that we look at our own self-care, the way we look at the way that we interact with the world, the way that we focus on our own emotional well-being. A couple years ago, when I was a writer at theroot.com, I had the pleasure of curating this series titled Quiet Storm. Now, the point of it was, and it was actually inspired by Hamilton, which I'm sure everybody has seen. Has everybody seen Hamilton in here? I've watched it so many times, my kids know the songs to Hamilton. One of my favorite plays, I was actually very impressed by what Lin-Manuel Miranda was able to do, but all those people on stage. But there's a song where he sings about being in the eye of the hurricane, there's quiet. And I always thought that was a very vivid image. I mean, it's a fact, hurricanes, there's the eye of the storm kind of thing. But like this idea that there's a storm brewing, but there's this, before you get there, there's this moment of quiet, there's this understanding, there's this space where perhaps you don't even realize what's happening on the outside because at the eye of it, there's this quiet. And I think that's a space where a lot of people, and I'm gonna personalize this, especially Black men, I think we live a lot in this space of having to hold things in and keep things to ourselves, even though you're, erupting on the inside. You have a lot of feelings, a lot of emotions, and I know how I grew up, and this is no shade to my parents whatsoever, but I don't ever remember being asked how I felt, ever. Like, I genuinely cannot remember a time when my parents ever said the words to me, how do you feel about anything? And I'm somebody who's witnessed a murder. I'm somebody who has been a party to more things that I would like to forget than most people probably. I've seen more death. I've been to more funerals. And it wasn't until more recently than people started caring about how I felt about things. And it's in that, like, as a Black man, as a person in this country who has to deal, you know what, actually, George Floyd gets murdered, May 2020, we're all familiar, everybody knows this story. All of a sudden, there's a very big shift in dynamic. There's a very big paradigm shift that requires all of us to start caring. Now, here's the problem. There's two problems, actually. Obviously, the murder of Black, brown, indigenous peoples at the hands of the state is a problem for any community, because if you if you take out any member of that community, you're weakening that community. We tend to focus on black men a lot, but this is a community problem, and I hate that. And I've been guilty of it too, erasing women and other communities from out of that discussion, because as a black man, that is always my focus. But the truth is, this is something that impacts all of us, communities of color. But it was around that time I noticed how many people started checking in on me. Everybody started asking me how I was doing. How are you feeling? Are you okay? And it was so interesting to me because I don't remember a time in my life where that many people genuinely seemed to care about how I was doing as a person. Because I think it's easy to look at people and they seem like they have things all together and just kind of assume that they're doing all right. But the truth is, everything that happens in this country impacts all of us in a very negative fashion. Not everything. Everything is not bad. I really, really enjoy things like the Essence Festival. I enjoy, there are a lot of things I enjoy. I just don't want to paint a bleak picture. But when something negative happens, it all impacts us tremendously. And one of those first steps in making sure that we have the ability to heal is people asking you how you're doing, and then you acknowledging that you actually have an issue, right? Like, one of the hardest things I've ever had to do was admit that there's a problem. So this is going to get very personal real briefly. My mother passed away a few months ago, almost 2 months ago to the day. And my mother and I have a very complicated relationship. I can put the phone away for this because this is 100% me. I don't need notes. My mother and I had a very complicated relationship before she passed. It had gotten better. But I wrote this article in 2017 titled "How Trump Ruined My Relationship with My White Mother." Over a million plus people read this article, the most read thing I've ever written in my life. I won awards for this article. My mother read this article. It ruined our relationship very personally, right? Because my mother saw something that I wrote. It was about her. And I don't even think the facts of what was stated were the problem. It was the fact that in the end of the article, I pointed out that I could live without her. That the things, my mother, white woman from France, Trump supporter, conservative, middle America, wasn't always that way, but people's lives, they move in different directions. Anyway, the point is, I wrote an article about a trip that she made here to DC that ruined our relationship for years. My mother didn't come to my wedding. She didn't come to my wedding, missed family trips. My children didn't have a relationship with her for a while. And my kids are little. I have a 13-year-old daughter, but she didn't see her grandmother for years. The pandemic made it even worse, right? We already had this separation. I didn't talk to my mother, period, for several months after I wrote this article, until one day she called me and, I finally answered the phone and I told her how mad I was about things, and I just broke down in tears because I didn't realize how much that had impacted me. We got better, and this is actually an article that the question I've gotten most in my life about is my mother. I would do talks in places and nobody cared about anything I said. People would actually stand in line at a microphone and say, "Hey, this talk was great. How are you and your mom? Are you and your mom okay?" Because everybody seemed very invested in that. My mom and I got back to a good place, and then she passed away in February from a heart attack. And I'm gonna try not to cry, but it's still new. So don't worry, I'll get myself back. But a couple of days ago, I went to go see New Edition at Capital One Arena. I've never seen New Edition perform. I always wanted to see Bobby Brown because Bobby Brown is literally my favorite performer of all time. Bobby Brown, as Whitney Houston has informed you all before she passed, was the greatest entertainer of all time. I don't even say that ironically. I genuinely mean this. I knew Bobby Brown was going to be there. Who knows how much longer that brother has, so I was like, I got to go see this show. Well, the openers for New Edition were Charlie Wilson and Jodeci. Miss Jodeci got there late. Charlie Wilson is on stage, and I'm watching this show, and one thing I know about my mother is how much she enjoyed Charlie Wilson, or more, formerly the Gap Band. They play Outstanding. I break out into tears at a concert. Now, nobody can see this because it's dark, it's loud, everybody's celebrating. I'm singing Outstanding too, but I have tears running down my eyes. And it was at that moment I realized I'm not good. Like, I am not in a good space. And I don't exactly know entirely what all that means or what to do about that. I mean, my mother passed away, right? Like, that's a traumatic experience for anybody, right? It's something most of us, will go through. Not most of us, we'll all go through in life. Hopefully that passing is not built up on a bunch of hills of other things, but having to acknowledge that what happened, that my mother passing, and all of the stuff that had happened before, and all of the pain and all that stuff, I'm thankful we got to a good place, but there was some healing and things that we needed to do. We still had places to go, and we're never going to get there. And now I have all these, when you go to funeral homes now, they have these things where they let you hit the microphone. They have these things where you can get somebody's thumbprint turned into like jewelry. And I got that done, right? I was like, this is, wait, I don't know, Mom. This might be one of the worst decisions I ever made. And I realized this recently because I literally touch this thing all the time. Like, I can't stop thinking about my mother, and I touch this thing all the time, right? And I am in this space now where I have to constantly think about how I'm going to heal myself. Not myself. Like, I have a big supportive community, and that's part of the healing process. I have a community of people that wrap their arms around me, that knew about everything that happened with my mother and I and how public that was. CNN tried to interview me about the relationship with my mom. Like, that kind of stuff was happening. And I had to tell CNN no. I was like, this is a 15-minute story for you. This is my life. Like, for you all, this is great. This is, wow, this is politics invading family. And for me, this ruined my family for 3 years. And having to deal with all of that on the back end and having to try to find a way to come back to center, but without the person I need the most, right? Because no matter how much we didn't get along, this was still my mother. Like, the woman the person who knew me before I knew me, the first person to love me kind of thing. So realizing I'm not good was kind of the point of that whole Quiet Storm series. That was a very long way of winding it back to that, by the way. This Quiet Storm series, which I invited a bunch of writers that I knew to write stories about mental health. There were 3 people that wrote stories outside of myself. Mine was not about my mother, actually, and I'll get to the other one. One was Kiese Layman, award-winning writer, author of the book Heavy, where he wrote about how growing up, nobody focused on your mental health. Everybody just focused on your physical. Everything else was going on. Like, you're just crazy. People just called you crazy. They just let you be crazy, but they didn't actually care about what that meant. Nobody tried to figure out how to get this part. It was all about just making sure that you were okay and able to function during the day. Bossy Ikpe wrote an article about, it was called On Loneliness at 3 a.m. in Lagos. She's a person that suffers with bipolar disorder, and the purpose of her article was talking about being stuck alone with her thoughts when nobody's around to talk to. There's literally nobody there, and the ideations and all the things that creates for her. Nafisa Thompson Spires, another award-winning writer, Bossy Ikpe's book, I'm Telling the Truth But I'm Lying, by the way, is possibly one of the greatest books I've ever read in my entire life. It's about her dealing with her bipolar disorder. I want to send 100 of those books to Kanye West so badly, and I want to watch him read it every single time. Nafisa Thompson Spires is a person who is an award-winning writer. She wrote another one of my favorite books called Heads of the Colored People. I read this book because it was called Heads of the Colored People, and that just sounds funny. That sounded like it was going to be a straight comedy, and it is. It's very funny. It's also the darkest comedy I've ever read in my life. And she wrote a book about dealing with an illness and sickness that she has, but it was called The Charms of Malady, which is basically the silver lining of dealing with all of the sickness that she has, including the drugs she gets to take. So it was kind of like this trying to find the joy in pain, the laugh to keep from crying kind of thing, which is interesting. It's probably one of the most brilliant things I've ever read in my entire life. And it hurt me to read it because I know what was under that. I understand what was under that. And then I wrote an article. Have y'all ever seen the movie John Q? Denzel Washington. It's a movie it's kind of a propaganda piece. It's the little man, the union worker who can't get health care, and he has to effectively commandeer a hospital ER to get his son the heart. He was basically going to commit suicide. I'm going to spoil it, by the way, if we're ever going to go see it. But it came out like 92. It's your fault. But the movie, anyway, what it's about is not as important as what happened. January 13th, 2011, about 2 a.m. in the morning, I get a call from my daughter's mother that my daughter is having breathing problems. We take her to Children's Hospital. We're in the ER for several hours at Children's Hospital. And turns out she's fine. That's great. I get home probably about 4 o'clock in the morning, and I turn on the TV because I can't go to sleep. I just spent hours in an ER, so I can't really go to sleep. Turn on the TV, John Q was on. So I'm watching John Q. Must have gone off. I think I, turn it off. I got about 5:30 a.m. I get a phone call from a 256 area code. I don't know this number, but 256 is the area code where my parents live. As it turns out, while I was in the ER, and then subsequently at home watching John Q, my best friend in life, my brother, was dying in a house fire at the time that I was watching John Q. A space heater with faulty wiring in the house sparked. He got his girlfriend, one of her daughters out of the house, and one of their friends, and went back into the house trying to save the other little girl that was in the room, and they both perished. Smoke inhalation. It was so bad that the paramedics wouldn't let his mother see his body. I haven't been able to watch John Q since. I have this fear that if I watch this movie, something bad might happen. Quite irrational, completely understand. But while I was watching this movie, my best friend was dying. And I can't shake that. It's just taking up space and rent in my head to the tune of that happened in 2011. It's 2022, and I still can't do it. I actually tried last year. I think I wrote an article about this. I tried to watch John Q. And I was so afraid to get to the end of this movie that I had to cut it off. I couldn't do it. That's a problem. Because this movie shouldn't have that kind of control over my life, right? Like this is a movie. It's a piece of art. It's Denzel. I've watched all kind of terrible movies. The least I can do is watch a movie with Denzel in it. But I had to take a step back from that and realize, like, listen, you have got to find a way to move past these things. And you have to acknowledge that you have some issues that you have to move past. Now, look, everybody has their superstitions and things like that, so it's okay. I will eventually watch John Q. It's not the greatest movie on the planet anyway. I'm not missing that much. So, maybe it's just easier for my life to not do that. But part of my own healing process was understanding why I was so afraid of watching something like that, why I'm letting a movie take such control of my life. That was the point of the Quiet Storm series that I wrote, or that I curated. It was trying to take a look at this because let's be real. Like I said when I opened up, one of the evolutions of culture is that we have taken a different look at mental health, right? We are no longer in a place where we make you feel bad because you aren't good. Now we allow people to live in this. Now that has negative consequences sometimes because I'm going to bring Kanye West into this conversation. Kanye West, a brother that probably needs more hugs than anybody I've ever met in my life. Well, I've never met him, but probably needs more hugs than anybody else. But it's interesting because we enable the way Kanye West was allowed to kind of like spaz out publicly implies that there's nobody around him to help him. When his mother passes away, it seems like she was the only calming force. Did anybody watch Genius in here? Fantastic doc. It's amazing seeing that version of Kanye that I thought I knew back in those years, right? And watching him and become somebody different. But you know what I took away from that? His mother was the only person that could calm him down. His mother was literally the only grounding force he had in his life. So what happens when you don't have that anymore? What happens when the only thing that can keep you calm in any way, shape, or form, that you feel supports you in the way that you need to be supported, isn't there any longer? Well, then you get a person who's basically, I can't remember what the term that was used, but I mean, Kanye West was abusing Kim Kardashian, he turned Kim Kardashian into a sympathetic figure. Who would have thought that was possible? People hated Kim Kardashian. She's appropriating this, she's doing this and that, and I don't know how I ever really felt. I don't think I cared that much, but I'm out here worried about Kim Kardashian. I'm like, man, this man is really making her life difficult. I wish he would stop. And that's what it looks like when you don't acknowledge that you need help. Now, I think Kanye did recently decide he's going to rehab. And I think that only happens once you acknowledge what you can do for yourself to make sure that you are getting the help that you need. Because if you don't, then what? Now everybody else has to worry about you and worry about what you're capable of and worry about what you might do. I want to talk about one of the most famous instances of we need to talk about somebody's mental health ever. Actually, two. Everybody in here has seen Encanto, right? No? Nobody seen Encanto? On Disney? Everybody's seen it, right? Jeez, oh my goodness. You haven't seen it? Your kids are too old. All right. Oh my goodness. And yes, I'm not saying it properly, but oh my goodness. I have watched this movie a smooth million times, and I am not exaggerating one bit. I watch this movie 3 or 4 times a day at this point. We Don't Talk About Bruno is the jam. Listen to it in the car. It's a bop. I think it's one of the greatest songs in Disney history. But interestingly, one of the most important songs in Disney history is also on the soundtrack, which is Surface Pressure, which is a song where Louisa, oh my goodness, I'm blanking on her name. What is the main character? Mirabelle. Oh my goodness. And nobody could even answer that question. Mirabelle, the main character. Mirabelle, her oldest sister was given this gift of like superhuman strength, but now it just makes her feel like she has to uphold the family at all times. Like she's the one who has to keep everything on her back. She has a song called Surface Pressure where she talks about the fact that it's hard when you are holding the world on your shoulders. Like, when do you get an opportunity to like let your guard down? I can't imagine what it's like to have that kind of pressure on me, which is interesting because I'm a husband and father, which it kind of feels like that's kind of like the stereotypical patriarchal role of being the husband and father, like everything kind of falls upon you. You're supposed to take care of everything. But this is a new day and age. My wife is more essential to my house than probably I am sometimes. I hope she's not watching. Because I don't want to walk into the house where she's like, I heard what you said. You realize that's true, right? I don't want that smoke. But it's a song about dealing with mental health. It's a song about dealing with the whole person and making sure that somebody is good and somebody's okay. And it's fascinating because I'm over here talking about Bruno, even though we don't talk about Bruno. When if you go on social media, the conversation that most people want to talk about that movie is the song Surface Pressure because of how much people feel like they have the world on their shoulders and they cannot find any reprieve. They cannot find the space to just let down their hair and be free sometimes and not have to worry about what's going on. That is not a good place to be emotionally. That's rough. That's hard. That's not what I was going to talk about. I was going to talk about Chris Rock getting the hell slapped out of him on stage at the Oscars. Because you know what? You know what's been so funny about that conversation? We almost haven't talked about Chris Rock at all. Chris Rock gets slapped, and he ate that. Chris Rock been slapped before. Only a person who's been slapped before is able to not break stance the way that he did and stay standing there. But he's a comedian. I imagine comedians get slapped a lot, especially when you talk about people. But everybody's talking about Will. What was Will doing? Protect black women. There's an argument to be made of whether or not that's actually what happened. Toxic masculinity. Chris Rock should have made that joke, blah, blah, blah. But I wonder what it feels like to be slapped on international TV as one of the most famous people on the planet doing your job. He was making a joke, whether it was a good or bad one or not. Like, pressure-wise, like, what is that? I mean, I don't want that to happen to me. I hope nobody walks up here and slaps me, but I guess I just wonder, like, how is Chris Rock doing? Like, is that brother okay? I don't even have a ton of sympathy for the man, but at the same time, is he okay? And I don't really see any conversations about that happening. That's what's been interesting to me about that. And that just lets me know, obviously, more people don't like Chris Rock than I thought. But also, people viewed what he said as so nefarious that it was worth it to some people to watch him get slapped because he was talking about a black woman in a very vulnerable state, that people have just decided that what Chris Rock got, what was coming to him. But I don't feel like that's the place we are right now. Like I genuinely want to know how Chris Rock is doing. And if I'm Chris, if I'm somebody where that happened to me, I imagine that while he's going to push through it comedically, he's going to use it as material. He probably needs a break. I know he's already back on tour doing things, but that man probably needs a break because the pressure of that in and of itself is the kind of thing that I know would crack most people. He's a millionaire. He's rich. I'm sure he'll be fine, like functionally, but processing things like that happen to us is important and essential to dealing with your mental health and healing from that. And what is healing anyway, right? It's just getting back right, getting back to a good space. Personally, I know I need to go to a therapist. I know for me, once I realize I'm crying at a concert and Charlie Wilson is singing, that there's a problem, that something is happening internally that requires me to go see about me. I need to see about myself. Because if I'm not good, how am I going to be good for the rest of the people in my family? How am I going to be good for my kids, my wife, my community, like the people that need me, my boys? If I'm not good, I can't be there for my friends. You know how people say, check on your strong friend? That's like a very popular saying right now, go check on your strong friend. But like, what if you're the strong friend? And you got to check on everybody. Like you're the one that's checking on everybody else, and people kind of don't, like everybody leans on you for these things. Thankfully, I have a group of friends where everybody's there for one another. Like I went to Morehouse. I got the greatest friends I could ever ask for in life, and we're all there for one another in spaces and ways that, like, I genuinely can't take for granted. Like, I can't afford to take it for granted. Like, I owe these brothers my life. These people have been there through things that if it wasn't for my friends and the community that I have, I'm not sure I'd be here right now. And I genuinely mean that. I mean, yeah. My brother went to Morehouse, he understands. Probably. We were having a conversation earlier about how, despite the fact that we all go to college, we all amazingly criminally minded while we're there. Which is an odd dichotomy. It's not really for this discussion here, but there's something interesting about the fact that all of us were in the space of higher learning and still concerned about what kind of criminal acts that we could partake in to ensure that we would be successful in life. I'm not saying it was everybody, it wasn't me. I'm lying, it was me. But I'm just saying, like, the point is, that's a different talk show. But, one of the first steps in healing is acknowledging you have an issue. I have done that for myself, right? I think if there's something that's happened traumatically in your life, you probably could stand to talk to somebody about that thing to see if that had any impact on you. I'm listening to Oprah Winfrey's book with Dr. Bruce Perry right now called What Happened to You, as opposed to what's wrong with you, but what happened to you. And it's really fascinating because even in the first few chapters, it's this reframing of this idea of how we even get to these spaces where we have these traumatic experiences and they're impacting us, right? Like, it all seems like common sense. That's the one thing. It all seems like common sense. Like, something happened to you in life negatively, it clearly is going to have impacts on you, but we don't like to treat things that way. Case in point. And I genuinely hope my parents are listening to, because it doesn't make them sound great. When I was 6 years old, I lived with my mother right outside of Detroit. I guess it's further than right outside. Milan, Michigan, which is south of Ann Arbor. Myself and my little sister. And my mom got sick. My grandmother, who was already raising the rest of my cousins, which is funny because this was not a black family, which is a very black family thing to do where grandma got everybody's kids. This was a white, foreign, French immigrant family. But either way, my grandma couldn't take us. So my little sister and I got shipped off to Frankfurt, Germany when my father was in the military to go live with him. Retrospect, best decision that was ever made for the whole thing. At the time, I don't even know my father. And it's not to say that I didn't know him in the sense that he just wasn't there. He was a presence. He lived in Germany. We lived in Michigan. He just wasn't there. I'd only seen him, I think, one time before in my life before he came to get us. I'm talking to a therapist. I'm just talking. She's like, tell me about your life. I'm like, yeah, this happened, blah, blah, blah. You know what I'm saying? Then I went and got some Kool-Aid and, then I went to school and, we just kind of kicked it. It's just life. She was like, I'm sorry. Can you stop? I was like, at what? It's like that part where you just said at 6 years old, you left your mother to go across the seas to go live with your father, who you just told me you did not know. I'm like, yeah, my mom was sick. She's like, no. Say that out loud again. And I'm like, I don't understand what it is you're trying to get me to say, lady. Like, I don't understand what the problem is. She's like, that doesn't strike you as odd? I was like, nah, it's life. Like, sometimes you got to get ripped out of your house and sent across seas to go live with some dude you don't know. Like, that's just what happens to people, right? Like, she was like, do you realize how traumatic that experience was for you? Like, it's not trauma. I was like, I was 6. You don't have trauma at 6. You just life. Like, my mom loved me. You know what I'm saying? I saw her later. I saw her like a year after that. And it wasn't until she kept badgering, how I viewed it as badgering about this. I was like, yo, is that actually a traumatic experience? And does that explain why I don't trust nobody? Or why I'm so fiercely independent and cannot rely on anybody for anything because I'm afraid if I do, that they might take that away from me? And next thing you know, I'm in tears. I'm boo-hooing in the office, like, my parents screwed me up. Truth is, they were just doing the best that they could, right? Like, most of our parents are doing the best that they can with the circumstances they have. And then she mentioned, later on in life, I went to college, but I went to Morehouse. I've said that a couple times. I'll say it more. It's important, Morehouse College. Sent your kids. I took myself to college. Now, I didn't view that as odd. My parents were busy, right? So I packed up my car and drove the 3.5 hours to Atlanta to go to college. This is whatever. I noticed everybody else's parents were moving them in, but you know what I'm saying? My parents had something to do that day. And it's not that they didn't want to be there, I guess it's just that they couldn't. And she stopped me again. Different day. Clearly I had a lot of issues. And she's like, that doesn't strike you as traumatic? I'm like, nah. I had a car. I could pack it up myself. I could take myself to college. She's like, well, did they come get you when you left? I was like, nah, I packed my car back up and, She's like, son, you have had some traumatic experiences in your life. Like, do you understand why you're even sitting in this room right now? I think the reason you showed up is different than the reason you need to be here. Because some of the things that I think that have happened to you, which is, I'm guessing life, to me, they were just life instances, are the kind of things that happen to all of us. I started having to get and seek therapy for those things, right? Like, I started actually having to think about how those things impacted my life. And I would love to tell you that I'm doing better about that stuff, that I am able to openly trust and rely on people and all the other stuff. But the truth is, it's hard. I didn't discover that those issues were traumatic until I was, an adult. So I've been living with this stuff my whole life. And then by the time I actually realize it, I don't even want to accept that. So it's hard for me to work on something. Like, I don't even know what to work on. Like, I'm not about to go talk to my parents and be like, yo, y'all are jacked up. My parents believe in beating. And I ain't too old to get beat. That's my understanding of the Southern coda. I'm joking, they wouldn't beat me at this point. I'm 42. But, well, they're unpredictable. So, But, in order for me to heal past some of these things that were genuinely affecting my life negatively, I had to start kind of going into myself and trying to understand what it was about me and what it is about all of us. And what are these things that we all can do in order to ensure that we are actually taking account of our own self-care and making sure that we're becoming the best versions of ourselves. So taking stock and talking to actual practitioners and trying to make sure that there are some action items and things that we can take away from here. I wrote down a list of things and then had this vetted by somebody who actually does this for a living, and it's probably somebody you should listen to. Seek therapy. Look, I'm gonna say this, I'm gonna be very genuine. Everybody needs therapy. Everybody needs somebody to talk to. I don't care if you think everything is good. I guarantee you there's something to talk to somebody about. If you got insurance, it's not that expensive, go buy a friend. And just go let them listen to you. This is the one friend that's gonna listen to you at all costs and give you some feedback. Feedback that's not rooted in trying to make you happy. Learn how to ask for help. This is one of the hardest things I have ever had to deal with. And it wasn't until I had a complete meltdown, even recently, about my mom that I had to I have to go see somebody because this is not working. I am functionally able to do things, but I am hurting and I'm angry. Don't be ashamed. Listen, I'm up here telling you how screwed up I am. We all have problems. We all have things we need to deal with. We all have things we need to address, and it is okay. This generation, I love this younger generation. Despite the fact that all of the music is very depressing and very drug heavy, like when I was coming up, all of our rappers sold all the drugs. Now apparently this younger generation is using all the drugs. I don't know how to deal with that, but there's a lot of sadness in a lot of the music that I hear. And I wonder if everybody's okay. This is kind of the point. Like everybody needs to not be ashamed to ask for help, because clearly a lot of us are hurting. Even the art that we are making is all coming from a place of hurt and coming from a place of need. Find community. The one good thing about social media is that if you are insane, there are more insane people to welcome you into their club. There is a community for every single person online. But the good thing about finding community is you can find out you're not alone. That's the most important thing. You're not alone, right? We are not alone in these things that we're dealing with. And I think it's important to understand that and embrace these communities that can help us become better people. You gotta learn how to be vulnerable. That's hard. I'm a black man. We are not the most vulnerable people on the planet. When we do become vulnerable, usually things break. That is unfortunately a byproduct of many things. I'm just gonna blame slavery. Seems like the easiest culprit, probably the most accurate culprit, to be honest with you, but black men have never typically had the space to be vulnerable in a way that has allowed us to heal and allowed us to become better people. We're working on that, trying, but it's the only way that I can be a good father. It's genuinely the only way that I can be a good parent to my children is to learn how to be vulnerable, because my kids how I am is how my boys are gonna be. How I am is what my daughter is gonna see in the other men that she deals with. Eat well, drink water, take walks. That was given to me by the therapist. It's important. The only way as a community, as people, especially people of color, for who there's a tremendous burden on us at all times to be better, to be more, to have to prove ourselves constantly, to have to show up when everybody else doesn't have to have to be excellent when everybody else gets to be mediocre, to have to excel in ways and in spaces, and to have to go so much further, to have to do so much work to get half as far. The only way we can do that is by addressing our own self-care, addressing our mental health, and doing our best to heal. There's no shame in it. Give yourself some grace. Do everything you can to get there, because we will all be better off if you do. Thank you.